My attention for the last 3 years had been repeatedly drawn to the subject of mesmerism, and about 9 months ago it occurred to me, quite suddenly, that in the series of experiments made hitherto, there had been a very remarkable and most unaccountable omission. No person had as yet been mesmerized in articulo mortis. Greetings, Poe fans. Welcome back. My name is Carmen Bolden,
And I'm Jeannie Smith, and we
and we
are
are the
the Potastic
Potastic
2.
Two.
Yay!
Yay! So,
We're doing
Jeannie,
you.
we kind of gave away a little bit during my quote of what we are
Mhm.
going to talk about this evening. But what are we
Well,
talking about this evening?
well, we are going to be talking about how we mesmerize our listeners and our viewers, if you watch our YouTube channel, about the wonderful world of mesmerism, or otherwise known as animal magnetism. It has several
Yes.
names. It even one time had a name of animal gravity, which when I think
Yes.
of animal gravity, I'm thinking of like elephants falling, and I'm going, yeah, that could hurt.
That
Just saying.
that almost sounds like an oxymoron.
It does, doesn't it? I'm like,
It really does.
what goes
So
up must come down. So yeah.
that's right. And so yes, so we might be doing subliminal messages throughout with the mesmerism and look into my eyes, and
Exactly.
but we'll try to avoid that as much as we can.
Exactly. So, and especially because when we're talking about mesmerism, we have to give kudos to the man behind the mesmerism. I guess we could say the man behind the eyes of it all, who
Yes.
was in the late 1770s when it came about. Because when you think about it, you'd think, oh, mesmerism, that must have been something, because, you think of the 60s, of the
Yeah.
psychedelic age,
Yeah,
you know,
you kind of
LSD,
yeah.
PCP, I mean, would you think? Because all especially the music. I
Yeah,
mean, some 60s
definitely.
music I can go for, but some of them, woo, you'd have
Yeah.
to be on PCP and LSD to
That's true.
hear,
All right,
understand it.
Jeannie. All right, we're coming back around. I'm bird walking you back or raven walking you back.
Hmm. Well, I'm
So
still talking about mesmerism, so
true. That's true. Well, I actually looked up the definition from Merriam-Webster, and it's defined as hypnotic induction held to involve animal magnetism.
yes, because I mean, and well, that's another thing, animal magnetism, which does not have the same connotation today as it did back in those days.
No, not at all. It's interesting how it has evolved, the definition
Mhm.
of it, and how we think of that now. And I guess we should probably go back to the OG who started it all. And
Yeah.
so, and his
Well,
name is Franz Anton Mesmer. He was
yeah.
born in 1734, died in 1815, and he was from Germany.
Yeah, he had a pretty good life, especially during that time. He lived longer than most in that area, but
Yeah,
I guess
I would
I
think
guess
so.
because yeah, I mean, because the span of life, especially in that area and that time, as crowded as Europe was getting, was only about maybe 50 years at the most.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a good average, but him living to what was it, about 70? So we said 70, maybe, yeah. You
Yeah.
said 1734?
Yeah, to
Yeah.
1815.
Yeah, so that's what, 64 plus 15. So that's 79.
You didn't think
79
you're going to have to
years.
do you didn't think we were going to have to do math on this episode, did you?
No, that's horrible. Stop that. And of course, like most in his day and age, he was born into a poor family in southern Germany.
Yeah.
So and he, like others in that area, he was first going into theology, the study of, you know, religion, I guess we can call it, because it doesn't
Mhm.
really have to be a specific. but theology, study of
Yeah.
a greater power, I guess you would say,
Yeah.
but switched to medicine
Mm-hmm.
in 1759. So that would make him what, about 25 when he switched? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about typical of someone during that time frame of what they would do like career-wise or school or something like that.
Yeah, and plus you have to say that during those days, that was the two main things, especially for men, to be interested in was either theology or science.
Yes, absolutely.
And well, yeah, because science actually started gaining more power because of Sir Isaac Newton coming
Mm-hmm.
around and starting his experiment about the sky falling. Or wait a minute, was that Chicken Little? Okay. No,
Oh gosh.
sky is falling. The sky is falling. Sorry. All right, but the apple that cracked good old Newton in the head, as the old saying goes.
Oh yeah.
And
Well,
then, of
and
course, you had the laws of gravity, and then you have the, Murphy's law of what can go wrong will go wrong coming out. So,
oh yeah. Well, and kind of tying it into the theology piece, I didn't find as much on that as you did. But one of the things that I looked or found in just reading different sources is that mesmerism for Mesmer it kind of relied on harmony in nature and dependency on unforeseen forces. So it wasn't really a religion added in, but it was really a combination of more science and mysticism than anything, which I thought that makes a whole lot more sense with what you're saying about his studies in theology.
yeah, and especially when you think about it, that he also, well, this, of course, in that day and time was a controversy, not only with the medical, but with, the fighting against the theology part with Newton and everything, and
Mm-hmm.
him bringing science and taking away from the church.
Mm-hmm.
However, Newton's whole topic of physics were ruled and essential about the force of the planets moving around the sun.
Yeah.
Wherein Mesmer's animal magnetism, he also believed that the Earth, the planets, the moon, everything had something to do with a person's animal magnetism.
Yeah.
Basically, how people dealt with disease, how they dealt with life, things that could go wrong, fame, fortune, things like that. So he was kind of mixing the spiritual and the science in
Yeah.
certain avenues
Mm-hmm.
to bring this back around. And what I thought was really, really weird, I guess
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it, is that when he started treating this, we
Mm-hmm.
think about hypnotism when we think about mesmerism.
Well, and it stems from mesmerism. So you're right
Exactly.
on target, really.
Yeah, but the thing about it is that Mesmer, when he started it, kind of, you know, didn't really condition people with hypnosis, but he used magnets, you
Right.
know, iron and certain elements to try to balance the body and the mind together. And that was how he believed in his ability to control an invisible fluid that
Yes.
people had in life. It was I guess we could call it our flow of life.
Yeah.
So,
I think that would be a good way to say it.
yeah, and so that's how he would treat people, and he would treat them not one by one, but he actually created, I don't know if I'm saying this right or not, but a
Okay.
baquette. It's a shallow wooden tub that was filled with magnetized water and iron bars and large enough to treat 30 patients at a time.
Yeah.
And then they
And
would make their hands while sitting in this bucket and allow the magnetic fluid to circulate around them. And all I can think about is sports today, of
yeah,
how that when they play a game or anything afterwards, the physical therapist or
they
whatever
go
you want to
soak.
call them.
Yeah.
Yeah. they put them in these bathtubs that are made of
Hmm.
metal that are circulating this water at a higher temperature. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, so
It's
maybe,
modern mesmerism.
yeah, it's modern mesmerism going on right here. Uh, However, like with anything, because nowadays we don't think anything of that. We know of things that different people, we got functional medicine, we've got vitamins, we've got Tai Chi, we've got somatic yoga, we've got those kinds of things because most people believe that there is a way to balance the mind, the body, and, either the spirit or the soul to help
Yeah, well,
the body heal itself.
that holistic approach,
Exactly.
with more home remedies and things like that.
Hmm.
What I also thought was interesting was that he would make these magnetic passes also with magnets over the areas that people complained about, but then that hypnotic trance like state that he would put people in was he would look deeply into someone's eyes. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I think that's kind of where that, down the road it evolved into hypnotism. But
Yep.
then he also, the first time he did this was he applied the magnets to a woman's body, and he could feel the flow through her body, and he would try to control it basically at his own will. And so I thought that was really weird. It just the way it was described.
Yeah, that in itself once again lends upon my mind automatically going to the carnival of people
Yes.
in the times that would travel around and they would, use mentalist ideas
Yes.
and hypnotic ideas to, pretty much milk people out of their money.
Yeah.
That's the best way I could say it.
Yes,
So
snake oil
that,
salesman.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So, but at the same time, it's like we've come around to this way of thinking of mesmerism and hypnotism and stuff like that have had their successes.
Yeah.
But it's become a more varied technique than just sitting in a tub of water with magnets or having magnets placed on you. However, you could see these sales of people selling these knee pads and stuff like that with copper embedded into them
Mm-hmm.
because copper is seen to be a good, you know, what you call it, conductor of health for a
Right.
body.
Right.
And so this to me has Mesmer stamp all over it because
Oh,
instead of using
yeah.
magnets, copper is just another element that, and we as people are made up of many, many of the elements on the periodic table. I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
say all of them, but a
Right.
majority of them is what we are made out of. And so Mesmer, he become rich, he become famous, especially in Venice until it got the better of him, and
Yeah, it
then
was Vienna. I think it was Vienna.
oh, Vienna, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry,
That's okay.
Vienna, Venice.
I
I was
know.
close.
I
I
know.
was close until all of a sudden he had to basically pack up and leave because of skeptics. And then he ended up back in Paris,
Yes.
and good old King Louis XVI came after him because there is a lot of skepticism, really, from the head of the French Royal Academy of Scientists that came at him saying, dude, you are a fraud, basically.
Quack. Yes. And
Yeah, you're a quack.
that was around the mid 1780s. So from the time he kind of coined, I guess, the phrase mesmerism, or it
Mhm.
became a thing, an
Yep.
official thing, in the 1770s, official in 1774, going into the 1780s when Louis the 16th said, hold on, that's
Hmm.
not a whole lot of time for this to last in Europe.
No, no. And the good thing, well, or bad thing, I guess, as you can call it,
Yeah.
is that his popularity was growing because not only the the rich were flocking to him, which was making
Hmm.
him, you know, but also poor people were coming to him to try to cure their ailments. And they were
Yes.
looking for anything.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the biggest thing is that, unfortunately, by the order of Louis XVI, with his appointed committee, which included, by the way, good old Benjamin Franklin, who happened to be an
Yes.
ambassador to France at the time.
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, gotta got those ties to America coming out there.
Yep.
But it kind of ruined him. So he
Yeah.
had to get out of Paris because he had lost it once again. But the idea of mesmerism and animal magnetism, especially, didn't die.
No, and the committee basically said after they did the report and came out in 1784 with the official statement that it basically was a product of the power of suggestion, which totally makes sense, even though Mesmer claimed that, these blockages, which he said he could control with the magnets and everything, the flow was blocked. It would cause this emotional or physical disease. And if you're telling people this and those magnets are reacting in the water or however he's doing the process,
Yep.
it you would think that a person, especially if they weren't as educated as others, would think that maybe they are cured.
Yeah. I mean, and we've all known and we've all, found this interesting or read about it or heard about it or seen it
Hmm.
about the whole thing of mind over matter.
Yes.
And I'm sorry to say, but that to me is all that mesmerism
Yeah.
is just someone convincing you and then you convincing yourself and your body because there has to be a balance. It's all about balance and in way I think about it anyway. And
Yeah.
at mesmerism, that's all he was doing. He was trying to balance the body, the mind, and the soul
Yeah.
to, make a person better. Now, unfortunately, reality of diseases, some diseases cannot be controlled or, tamed or cured by just the mind alone,
Right.
as we found from the Black Plague and other things. Uh, but mesmerism started popping up everywhere because most people that were perusing around Europe, especially these up and coming doctors from America,
Yeah.
that found that they fell into the mesmeristic idea of
Yes.
mesmerism and brought it back to good old US of A. And it found its way into newspapers and articles, whether it be in American articles or European. Well, that's how Poe found out or saw the idea
Hmm.
of the mystical world in these
Yeah.
articles. Because him
Yeah.
being a critic, he wanted to talk about it, or he saw it was his duty to say something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one thing I wanted to read from an article I found called The Birth of Mesmerism. This is
Hmm.
from a contemporary English doctor during this time frame. And this is pretty short, but he says his patients were received with the air of mystery and studied effect. The apartment, hung with mirrors, was dimly lit. A profound silence was observed, broken only by strains of music which occasionally floated through the rooms. The patients were seated around a sort of vat which contained a heterogeneous mixture of chemical ingredients. With this and with each other, they were placed in relation by means of cords or jointed rods or by holding hands, and among them slowly and mysteriously moved Mesmer himself, affecting one by a touch, another by a look, a third by passes with his hand, a fourth by pointing with a rod. One person became hysterical, then another. One was seized with catalepsy, others with convulsions, some with palpitations of the heart, perspirations, and other bodily disturbances. I just thought that was very telling with what went on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good rendition of what mesmerism was at that time and
Yeah.
how it was controlling of the population,
Yeah.
of the psyches of the population too. And as
Mhm.
you was reading it, the things I was immediately touching upon automatically had me going to the theological ideas of an exorcism.
Yes, that's a good way to explain it. That's almost like expelling the blockage or whatever that he thought someone had.
Yeah, especially with the use of mirrors and, even though they were using rods and other elements, because I was thinking about fire, how it's lit
Yeah,
of candles,
yeah,
the reading of the tome and those kind of things. And I was just, you can see that there is a correlation or um a cinematic, I guess,
yeah, yeah.
to
Kind of
to
going
both
back,
ideas. Yeah,
to what you said, kind of about like a carnival show and that cinematic effect of, putting on a show.
exactly. So, I mean, hey, it was very much being attributed to the ideas of the time and people seeking out ways of curing themselves, because most people need to remember that during this time period, there was nothing like the antibiotics or anything that we know of today to cure just the common diseases that everybody
Yeah.
gets. I mean, getting the common cold would be the equivalent of maybe heading down the road of getting worse
Mm-hmm.
and dying from it, because there was no combatant of any
Yeah.
kind. I mean, there
Yeah.
was ideas and there were doctors and they were doing experiments and things were happening, but it was not accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
And
That,
because it's
yeah.
just like in days like today, the higher treatments, you have to have a certain level to be able to reach those higher treatments, and they're not available to everybody.
Yes. That's true.
So,
Even with insurance and all the other things that go with that.
yeah, and then one thing about Poe, he actually saw mesmerism as an illuminating force that was capable of binding the mind and the body together.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I think that's why he latched onto it so well, is because he was very much a proponent of writing things that was beneficial for a person's mind and body.
Yeah. And it kind of ties in with, we already talked about phrenology with our science episode earlier this season,
Yep.
and just mental phenomena, the insanity that Poe wrote about, the psychology, and the soul in general. And I think, and Poe always, Jeannie, you always say this, Poe wrote what he knew, or,
Yep.
Poe wrote, yeah, I'm trying to make it too complicated. Poe wrote what
Ah,
he knew. I was trying to make it rhyme.
yeah.
And and so mesmerism, once mesmer, the mesmerism kind of came over the pond into the
Mhm.
United States in the 18th, I'm sorry, the end of the 18th century and really into the early 19th century.
Yep.
Um, it really saw a revival. And you'd think that with Benjamin Franklin being on that committee, he would have really pushed more. But, I mean, he did have his hands in a lot of other things. So, um,
Yeah, and plus Benjamin Franklin was his scientist himself.
right,
So
exactly.
he was very much a proponent of the growth of science, but
Yeah,
at the same time, he did not want, as we have said earlier, quacks muddying the
yeah,
pond of true science in their opinion. You
right,
got
right.
Newton coming up with physics of the gravity of the world and the astronomy of the planets, and no longer a flat earth, it being round. And then you had Franklin himself, who was doing experiments about electricity.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the man was the one that created the lightning rod
Mhm.
that's to try to stop fires for houses. And he was also not only the person to create the first fire department, but he's the one that came up with the idea of a hospital. The university, not university, the Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, was it Philadelphia or Pennsylvania? Can't
Well,
remember the
Philadelphia
name
was
of the
in
hospital.
Pennsylvania. Are you
Do
talking about?
what?
I said Philadelphia's in Pennsylvania.
No, I'm talking about the name of the hospital that Franklin created.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
So I
I
can't remember
misunderstood.
if
Sorry.
it was, yeah, I can't remember if it was named the Hospital of Pennsylvania or if it was the Hospital of Philadelphia. I can't remember if he made it
Okay.
state or city. But
Gotcha.
anyway,
Okay.
so it was his idea because one thing he wanted to get help for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
even the ones that were suffering mental illnesses. And I
Right.
think that's one of the reasons maybe Franklin was such against Mesmer is because he felt he was not only a quack, but he was not really helping.
Yeah.
He was using it as a way of getting rich rather than curing. And I'm not
Yeah.
making Franklin out to be some altruistic,
Yeah.
monk of any kind. But
Yeah. He
he
had his
was,
vices. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, he had his own vices and stuff. But at the same time, he was very much a proponent of science, is
Yes.
what I'm getting to.
Yeah. Well, and as we know, Poe also dabbled in lots of science, and with mesmerism, he used that in. There's a tiny bit in Eureka. He
Mhm.
also used it in some of his criticisms and some of the stories which we're about to talk about. But
Yep.
what I think around 1829 is when mesmerism was brought to America, and I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, by Ducom Ducamum, a pupil of, is it Puy Segur, is what
Okay.
I read. And then by 1836, Charles Posen was the most prominent mesmerizer practicing in the US. So, and if you think about 1836, even more than 1829, because 1829, Poe would have been, let's see,
20.
yeah, he
He
would
was
have
in
been, because
20.
1830 he was at West Point, and so he would
Mhm.
have, he probably did read about it, but 1836 Poe is more into his writing career at this point, and so it really ties into the fad of the time brought to America.
Yes. And I mean, we have talked many times about how Poe loved his forensic science.
Yes.
That's the whole thing of Dupine. And then we talked about infernology, which has since been debunked because,
Hmm.
many people, especially in that day and age, they were, deciding about personality and everything based on the bumps on your head,
Right,
which,
right.
like, well, if you hit your head hard enough, you don't have to worry about it. But I'm just
Yeah.
saying. But yeah, Poe would be, I mean, he'd be all over this.
Yeah, and
And he
he
was.
he really came into it in around 1841,
Uh-huh.
is kind of the about the time that he started really reviewing works written
That
about
dealt with,
mesmerism, where he was critiquing and things, and so
yeah, and wasn't
that
it
all
around
makes
about
sense.
1844? Was it
Hmm.
1844? His first publication with mesmeric in mind, or mesmerism in mind.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you had to, his three main tales, I guess, or stories, short stories,
Yeah.
was Mesmeric Revelation, A Tale of the Ragged Mountains, and The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar.
Right, and Tale of the Ragged Mountains was published in April of 1844 in Godey's Lady Book.
Right.
Mesmeric Revelation was around August 1844 in the Columbian Magazine, and the facts in the case of, you can either say M.
M.
Valdemar or
Valdemar.
Monsieur Valdemar, was
Monster.
December of 1845 in the American Whig Review. But then there's a little sprinkling of mesmerism in the Spectacles, which I forgot to look up the month, in 1844. It was published, but it really, he only kind of talks about animal magnetism in that, in a little short part, not really mesmerism, but it's mentioned when, basically about how the man instantly falls in love. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers about who he
Yeah.
falls in love with, so we'll leave it at that. And then, of course, Jeannie's favorite, and published in
Whatever.
1845. And we'll
Mhm.
go through the other three stories more in just a moment. But I'll do
Mhm.
this for you, Jeannie. I'll talk about this one so you don't have to.
Good. I
Some
agree with that.
words with a mummy.
Yeah.
The mummy, basically, the doctors, when they're talking to the mummy, they're like, oh, these things have come through advancements in science, and the mummy's discounts mesmerism, kind of like, oh, psh, that's old news. And so, but just, it's barely, it's like just sprinkled in those two stories.
Yeah, and then that's the truth of the matter is, well, we had discussed about animal magnetism that it has changed to the connotation today where it talks more of a sexual prowess.
Right, right.
Back in those days, animal magnetism, Mesmer was just referring to the spirit, I guess you would say, of
Hmm.
the animal,
The
the earth,
soul, and
the
yeah.
soul, yeah. And which goes back to the very first discussion of a religion,
Hmm.
which, if you want to trace it back, actually went back to spiritualism, which
Okay.
was the first one because that was during the, in Africa of the first like hunter gatherers, even earlier than them, that they believed that everything had a spirit.
Okay.
Whether it
Yeah.
be an animal, a vegetable, rocks, everything had a spirit or a life force, is what Mesmer kind of goes along with his animal magnetism. He
Yeah.
believed
Which
that
almost
everything
kind
had a
of,
life force.
it almost sounds a little bit with like Hinduism in a way,
Yes.
with reincarnation and things like that.
And it kind of works because, Hinduism is the oldest known religion.
Right. Right.
And so spiritualism was first, you have Hinduism, Judaism, they were right there. Hinduism is earlier, but
Hmm.
this was the time of when humanity was developing and it was developing its ideals. And
Yes.
so it based its ideals on different things. Everything
Yeah.
had like a life force kind of thing, and it kind
Hmm.
of spread. So Mesmer was keeping along those same lines with his animal magnetism about the life force. And that's why he was using these magnets and these other things to try to balance the life force.
Right. Yeah.
And so Poe, being Poe, and if you read most of his works, which I haven't read every single thing yet,
Yeah. Me
but
neither, but
I'm
we're
getting there.
working on it. We're working on it.
Yeah. But Poe likes to put these types of ideas in his works about
Yes.
not only just life force, but there being a balance in life
Yeah.
and death. He brings about that there is a circle. I don't want to bring in the whole Disney circle of life thing, but
The
uh,
circle of life. Sorry.
that's all right.
Go ahead.
I no, I was just I got flashback to the Lion King all of a sudden.
I know.
Um,
I had to throw that in there. Had to throw it
but
in.
I mean, it is a perfect example of what we're talking about with animal magnetism, about the life force and about everything having a balance.
Yeah.
That it was the idea of Mesmer, and
Yeah.
this is the idea, and the life and death thing all fits with the case of in Voldemar because that was the whole thing that where the hypnosis of a dying person
Mm-hmm.
comes in because they want to try to vision or find out what happens at the moment of death.
Exactly. And this is a, I think, very under noticed story.
Mm-hmm.
It is awesome. I remember when I read it, I'm like, why is this not more known? than other some of his other stories, because, and I don't want to give away the ending at all,
Yep.
but I really enjoyed it, and I guess it kind of even helped me like really dig into mesmerism even more when I read it.
Yeah, and the thing about it is it plays very much into anyone that has had to deal with the death of anyone,
Yes.
especially at the last moments of death.
Hmm. And kind
Because
of hanging on longer.
and then there's like a moment of reality of, you know, coming to be right before the end. And if you look at it, at anything that dies, you know,
Hmm.
you see what Mesmer was talking about with the life force. You can literally see from the force that it was to no more.
Yeah, where it
And
leaves
then,
the body. Yeah.
yeah, and that's Mesmerism in its finest right there.
Yeah. I agree. And one very curious note about the facts in the case of Monsieur Voldemort is
Hmm.
that people, many people, when it first was published, thought that Poe had found a medical case and turned it into this short story, and he was reporting on something that really happened. And kind of
Hmm.
like, with his balloon hoax and other things,
The
it
tale of Mary
really,
Roget,
the what?
the tale of, the case of Marie Roget.
Yes, yeah, that, yeah, this is a real case and he's reporting on it, and it's like it's a work of fiction. I just
Yep.
thought that was very interesting that, you know, I don't want to say the gullibility of people, but at the same time, Poe was such a good writer in so many different ways and styles that he could convince an audience that this was something real is incredible.
Well, and at the same time, the fantastical, I'm just going to use that word because that's
Yeah,
what it is.
yeah.
The fantastical of things, and especially certain days and age of trend, you
Hmm.
wouldn't get it now because we are so inundated with a social media influence
Yeah,
that anything from back then we could not be fooled. I'm using air quotes.
yeah,
We could not be fooled. But if you think about it, I mean, the whole radio, the world of the worlds.
right. This is
I mean,
before that. Yes.
yeah. And the whole difference is that Poe only had a reading audience of the newspaper or magazines or
Hmm.
books. He did not have the way of, you know, putting it out to more and more people. But then when the radio came into play, you can just imagine if you could take one of Poe's stories back in those times, as
Hmm.
they did with Orwell,
Yeah,
and put one of his stories online, it would fall into the exact same thing. Because if he can fool people that are just reading it,
yeah.
can you imagine what would have happened if someone was performing this?
Oh my gosh, I know.
As it was an actual, I mean, because he writes like it's a news report or some,
Yeah.
a magazine report. So I
Hmm.
can see where people would fall into the idea that he was talking about reality.
Yeah.
Now, the balloon hoax wasn't far off in those days because the weather balloons and the hot air balloons and things like that were coming in
Hmm.
to become prominent. I mean, most
Yeah.
people think it's just fantastical when you tell them that, oh, they used hot air balloons in the Civil War. Yes, they did. They
Hmm.
would actually drop bombs using the hot air balloon. So it was like the first air, air, air.
Raids, or I
Yeah,
guess
yeah, I guess we would call it air raids or I mean, no,
airdrops.
they weren't accurate by any means because
Yeah.
trying to control a hot air balloon was like a hit and a miss, just like the muskets of the American Revolution trying to hit thing, it was like a 1 out of 10 shot, you might hit something,
Yeah.
but unless you're right on top of it. But at the same time, it's what makes Poe and all this so great is
Yes.
because there was the mixture of the fantastical with the mixture of reality, to where most of the time what we at one point thought was, fake, in in today's age, are now
Mm-hmm.
true to life.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the idea of a cell phone where you could talk to someone halfway around the world, that was a fantastical idea because most people thought, oh, we're not going to talk to anyone without a radio. Well,
Yeah.
radios didn't come into existence before telegraphs. So
Exactly.
I think Poe was just proving a point that he was very much ahead of his time, and he could see things. I don't want to bring about mystical here, but he could see things that other people couldn't.
Yeah.
He had that futurism, I guess is the word I want to use. Futurism.
Yeah, or futuristic. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we always do joke that Poe was a time traveler, and it it just the his brain and the observances that he could see and predict, and just ratiocination. I mean, if you really want to
Yeah.
just get that, boil it down to deduction, induction, all of the critical thinking, he was brilliant at it. And it's fantastical in surreal. That's why this is our surrealism
Yeah.
episode.
Exactly. It's Poe.
Because
What
yeah,
do you
and
know?
met and in a mesmeric state, thinking about these stories, people, you know are they dead in this mesmeric state and having a conversation, and but they're really dead, or are they really dead? It is
Hmm.
very surreal when think about it.
Well, and then if you add into it, if you think about people who are in comas,
Mm-hmm.
are they truly?
Cognizant of
Yeah,
hearing. Yes.
because they could be in the opposite effect of a mesmeric state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think so.
So,
Well, and we do want to also mention about the other two main stories where mesmerism is a focus in both stories.
mhm.
And which one do you want to talk about first, Jeannie? Ragged Mountains or Mesmeric Revelation?
Let's just go from mesmeric revelation.
Okay, we'll go backwards in the order of when they were published. Yes.
Yeah,
And
and we could go in the order of people that may know them.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, because I
Of
think
popularity.
Baltimore's probably more known, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mesmeric Revelation, it really is, similar. It has similar notes of Voldemort, in
Hmm.
that a man really, he wants to kind of connect, whether God exists or not, and he's dying. Where's his soul going after his death, and things like that. And so he's put in a mesmeric state, and conversations are had between he and his doctor and things like that. I think I've got that. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the perfect summary because it hits upon what anyone of any day and age goes through when it facing their own mortality. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what mesmeric revelation is truly about,
Yeah. And
is
it's been a
study and
while.
mortality.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read it, so I was kind of digging from my brain on that one.
Yeah. So it was good. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all three really good stories. I've read A Tale of the Ragged Mountains a while ago, and I know it's like a man's journey. And I know, Jeannie, just from talking to you before our episode, you explained this one because I think you did a really good job of it.
Well, A Tale of the Ragged Mountains, first of all, I think was Poe's only one that took place in the Virginia area, that
Mm-hmm.
he made it more close to a hometown as anything.
Yeah, because
Uh,
I think it was Charlottesville, Virginia, where the story took
yes,
place, with an
Charlottesville,
unknown
Virginia,
narrator again.
exactly. And it even talked about and mentioned Saratoga, New York, and those places. But it brings about how he meets this man, the unknown, the unreliable narrator
Mm-hmm.
meets a man who he couldn't fathom him because he is just, he just doesn't look like what a man's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
He looks gaunt. He looks, he doesn't look horrible, but he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look good. And then
Yeah.
he comes to find out that this man was under a doctor's, I'm using air quotes again. I know about no one can see it, but he was under a doctor's advice.
Right.
And this doctor happened to be a fan or convert, as they say,
Mm-hmm.
to mesmerism or
Yeah.
animal magnetism at the time. And so
Mm-hmm.
had been treating this man for that. Well,
Okay.
turns out that the only thing that came of it, because he could not completely convince his patient that this was what it was supposed to be. So with a little help of morphine and with a little help of, money, this
Yeah.
guy pretty much, he tried everything, but it didn't cure him. But it
Okay.
didn't kill him either. Because that's kind of like, to me, that's the idea of the story. The Tale of the Ragged Mountain is like, he's not cured, but he ain't killed either. So,
Yeah.
but it very much goes into the fantastical about the guy who kind of finds himself in the mountains, kind of reaching his own type of nirvana type of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
And he goes into the state. He experiences a place and a people that you would, you would think, and I'm going to go back to this story because I'm not a real fan, but I do understand that some words with a mummy comes into play when you're reading it, because it's like, what? You don't really see that happening. But when the guy actually comes back from this jaunt
Yeah. Well,
in the
that's why I
evening,
called it a journey, kind
yeah,
of.
in the
Yeah.
evening, and he's telling his story, it is pretty much like if someone was tripping on some medication.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't know whether to believe him that it's true, or if he just kind of overdosed on some morphine and was seeing things.
Right. Right.
But it
Yeah.
was it was all about just a journey of trying to find something to heal himself, but ended up finding his spirit, I guess, is a
Yeah.
good way of saying it.
And that kind of goes back to what we said about Poe's writing, kind of that balance of the soul and what the soul experiences and what people go through in life and what happens after death.
Yeah, that balance of mind and body and soul
Yeah,
is
and one thing I want to add about mesmeric revelation, I looked it up. The person that kind of hypnotizes the person who is ill was a mesmer, or I guess that would be the best term to call him. Not necessarily a doctor, but he is a you know
a, a student of mesmerism.
yes, that would be a great way to say it. So, and I think in some of the reading that I did, by the time he published these stories between 1844 and 1845, kind of became really interested in mesmerism by 1841. From some of his criticisms and things toward this latter part of 1845, it seemed like that Poe moved away from necessarily thinking that mesmerism was a true science, but more of a pseudoscience, kind of like phrenology, because he used it to write the fad of the times, which things that are popular you're going to write, take advantage
Yeah,
of,
it's
and that
trendy.
kind of thing. But he kind of, at the kind of the end of this time period, classified it with more all of the different isms that were out there, meaning
Hmm.
that it was beneath a true science. Even though he wrote these stories about it, he used it in his critiques. There's a little bit of mention in Eureka, his own science. I think toward that time frame, he kind of moved away from this is not a real science.
Yeah, and I think it also goes along with at the time, the sciences that were being accepted were a physical. It was all
Yes,
about physical science and the physics,
absolutely.
whereas this, like mesmerism and phrenology and everything else, was on that precipice of the psychological.
Yeah,
It was a mental science where
absolutely.
in those days and age, mental illness wasn't even close to being identified.
No, and I was going to say because like Freud wasn't even born until 1856, and so like going into the study of the mind and the brain and how it works and functions and things like that. So yeah, so that was very early for even those kinds of studies of the mental that you cannot see, having
Yeah,
that
and I mean,
proof.
yeah, and the thing about it was is the people of that day and age were more accepting of a physiologic type
Mm-hmm.
of science than they were
Yeah,
of a psychological type of science.
yeah, absolutely.
Because you had like Nietzsche and you had Dumas and you had others coming into those worlds of having existentialism and transcendentalism and all that kind of stuff where that was being more accepted than anything doing with the psychological.
Yeah.
So it was just a time. It was, it was a flim flam of a pseudoscience in most ways, where in the absence, in the other absences or in the other instances, not absences, in other instances,
Mm-hmm.
it was like a carnival type of acceptance of
Yeah.
where these quacks, I'm using
Mm-hmm.
air quotes again, the
Yes.
people were just trying to make or trying to swindle people. They were the confidence man. This is a time period where the confidence man started coming out,
Right. Right.
conning people out of their money and all this by convincing them of things. And so you know, it was a hit and miss, and until, I mean, Freud himself wasn't even widely accepted. He thought by other scientists, he was even told that he was a little wacky.
Well, yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, we're
yeah,
all a
he
little,
had his
we're all,
issues.
and I'm going to change the quote
Yeah,
from Psycho. We all go a little wacky sometimes.
exactly. We all go a little wacky. We go wackadoodle.
Absolutely. And basically, mesmerism was superseded by hypnosis
Mm-hmm.
eventually. And that what we know as hypnosis now, the roots are very tied into mesmerism or magnetically charged from mesmerism.
Exactly.
And
Yes,
one,
nice tie in there.
yeah, and I tried. And
Mm.
one thing that I did look up, I didn't have as much time to look this up because I was more interested in the history and Poe, but I know our listeners might enjoy hearing about a little bit about this is when you think about vampires in horror and gothic horror and you think about the hypnotic state that some vampires are written to give to people, and some of it's not necessarily in the books but it's more on movies, TV shows and things like that. But
Right.
it you can kind of link it to mesmerism, but the one thing I found is that there's no real proof that maybe Bram Stoker read about mesmerism or anything like that. Again, I did not have time to dig deep into this. This could be maybe some episode later we talk about this, but it does seem like there are some connections, but it's not something that's like, Bram Stoker or other
Yeah.
writers that wrote about vampires pulled and read all this stuff about mesmerism and said, I'm going to use that. And, with that hypnotic trance like state that vampires can lure you in to be able to, bite your neck and kill you or just drain your blood.
Yeah. And at the same time, I think along those same kind of lines, I think the idea behind vampires mesmerizing
Mm-hmm.
their prey as a way of getting them to acquiesce to whatever they want them to do to make it easier for them to get their food source, basically.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's more pushing towards an idea that wasn't in the ideas of the Bram Stoker age.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
when I think more of the Bram Stoker ages and the ideas of coming out of that, kind of like with Frankenstein of those kind, they were very much a part of the day and age. Because Bram
Yes.
Stoker talking about Dracula, and Dracula came from Vlad the Impaler.
Right.
That was a true, he was a true person, and his his how shall we say, idiosyncrasies his
Yes.
idiosyncrasies of bathing in the blood of his enemies. And some people even said that he drank the blood of his enemies before impaling their head outside his, castle. But that's how the whole idea of vampirism came into where we are today. People have created more of a romantic idea of vampirism. And I think that's maybe where mesmerism came into it too, as pushing it more to the romantic side
I
rather than just the horrible side.
Yeah, I think so. And Mitty has conquered or killed the conqueror worm. You might hear him. So
Woo!
he
Get
just
it,
brought
Mitty.
it to me. Sorry to.
It's all right.
He's
He has
impaled
impaled
the.
his worm.
Yes, he has.
He
Yeah,
has
but again,
conquered and
I
mesmerized.
don't want to say too much just about my own theories about mesmerism, hypnotism, and vampires. It ties into this, but I want to do more research on that before I speak to it. But I think there's some loose things in there, but I'm really thinking it's more of the Hollywood genre or the
Mhm.
Hollywood part of it.
Creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and I may be wrong, but again, I don't want to
Well,
quote
there'd be
anything on
nothing
that.
wrong with it. It's kind of like when I was saying that, the romantic side of it being put into play and
Yes.
building that idea of, where the idea of vampirism was more along the lines of someone who was in horror fic,
Right.
where
Right.
and then build upon. Because I mean, now we think about it, even Bram Stoker's, when they created it from the book and made it into a movie,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it had a touch. I'm just gonna say a touch, because to me you know, it was very well put together, but there was that touch of a romance. And it
Yes.
wasn't more of the Dracula romance. It was more of, the romantical ideas.
Yeah, the gothic
Yeah, the
romance.
Gothic romance.
Yes.
There we
Yeah.
go.
I agree. I totally agree.
So, I mean,
Absolutely.
there may be ideas. I'm like you, we could probably look more into it and do some more research, but at the same time, we can just let our own kind of opinions and our own ideas percolate and come up with, this could have happened. This could be this could be that, without asking these people point blank and
Yeah.
knowing exactly what they were doing and how it came to be. They're still suppositions.
Yeah,
So,
and it gives everybody something to think about if you are interested in that. I mean, Poe really didn't have the vampire lore, but
mm,
it was just something to pull in from horror, gothic horror. So,
exactly.
yeah. Well,
So it
Jeannie,
fits really well.
do you have anything else about
No,
mesmerism?
no, I mean, I think I've hypnotized everyone enough with my ideas and mesmerized everyone with the idea of Poe and his take. So I think I'm good. I'm good and mesmerized. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think I am too. So on that
So
note,
we
we
are
are
Poe
Poe out.
as the sleepwaker pronounced these latter words in a feeble tone, I observed upon his countenance a singular expression which somewhat alarmed me, and induced me to awake him at once. No sooner had I done this, than with a bright smile irradiating all his features, he fell back upon his pillow and expired. I noticed that in less than a minute afterward his corpse had all the stern rigidity of stone.